Before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. And if you're watching this late at night, let me know where you're from and what time it is where you are. That way, YouTube knows you want more stories just like this, delivered straight into the dark. Now, let's begin. I spent nearly a decade working cruise ship security for one of the largest fleets in the industry. I've seen drunken brawls, theft, medical emergencies, even a suicide or two. But nothing ever made my blood run cold like what happened in the winter of 2018 on the Aurelia Dawn, somewhere off the coast of the Azores. We were midway through a 14-day Atlantic crossing, the kind of route mostly filled with retirees, solo travelers, and the occasional digital nomad looking for a cheap floating hotel. The ship held over 3,500 passengers and about 2,200 crew. It was easy to get lost, easier to disappear. It was my third month aboard and I was on the night shift, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. The hours where the ship became a different world. The music stopped, the bars closed, and the decks went eerily silent. The kind of silence that almost hums in your ears if you stand still long enough. That night it was around 2:47 a.m. I remember the time exactly because I had just logged a routine patrol entry on my handheld. I was walking down deck 4, one of the quieter passenger levels, usually used for crew shortcuts and occasional maintenance access. That's when I saw her. At first glance, she looked completely ordinary, maybe mid-30s, slim build, long black hair clinging wetly to her shoulders. She was barefoot and wearing a soaked white sundress that clung to her skin like she had just stepped out of the pool, except the pool was 2 decks up and closed hours ago. She was standing at the far end of the corridor facing the wall, not moving, not even flinching at the buzzing fluorescent lights above her. I called out, "Ma'am, you're not allowed down here. Are you all right?" No response. She turned her head slightly toward me, just slightly, enough that I could see her face. It was blank, not scared, not confused, just vacant, like no one was home behind the eyes. She turned and walked through the heavy steel bulkhead door at the end of the hall. Here's the thing. That door requires a security keycard to open. It leads into a restricted access corridor that runs along the edge of the engine room. Even most crew aren't authorized to go in there alone at night. I ran to catch up. I scanned my card and yanked the door open. No one. The hallway was empty, dry. No wet footprints, no lingering sound. Just the mechanical hum of the engine turbines several meters below. I radioed to the command center to ask if they'd seen anything on the security feeds. After a moment, dispatch responded, "We've got you on deck 4, but no one else is visible in that corridor." They even rewound the footage. Still nothing. Just me, walking, talking, reacting to no one. I didn't sleep well the next day. The following evening, just after midnight, one of the housekeeping supervisors came to the security desk, clearly rattled. He said one of his staff had gone to clean cabin 4362, an interior room at the far end of deck 4, and found wet footprints leading from the bathroom to the edge of the balcony door. Thing is, that room hadn't been occupied for the last 2 sailings. It was blocked off for maintenance due to a plumbing issue. No one had checked into it. And the balcony door? It was locked from the inside. Deadbolt secured. We checked it out ourselves. The footprints were real. I saw them with my own eyes. Damp imprints of bare feet across the carpet, trailing toward the sea. But here's what truly unnerved me. I went back to the footage from the previous night. I watched myself approach that corridor again. And just as I reached the bulkhead door, right before I entered, the camera glitched. Just a flicker. A static burst. And in a single frame for less than a second, there she was, standing behind me, soaking wet, head tilted, eyes locked directly into the camera, then gone. The static cleared. I opened the door. The hallway was empty. I didn't report that last part. YouTube horror creators might chase that kind of story, but in cruise ship security, we keep things quiet. We don't spread panic on a floating metal city in the middle of the ocean. But I never walked deck 4 alone again. And every now and then, on quiet nights when the ocean feels too still, I swear I hear the faint drip, drip, drip of water, even when the halls are dry. I've worked on 3 cruise lines over the years. Big ships, small ships, luxury liners, party cruises. I've seen the best and worst of it. But one thing always stuck with me. Every crew has ghost stories. Some are just made up to mess with new hires. Others stay consistent no matter which ship you're on. There's always talk of a certain cabin, a room that shows up on the crew's internal maps but not on any passenger brochure. A room that no one ever checks into, and no one talks about. On the Mirabel horizon, that room was cabin 9284. It didn't mean much to me at first. Just a number, just another cabin on deck 9. I walked past it a dozen times a day and never gave it a second thought. Until one night, halfway through a Caribbean circuit, I got a guest complaint logged at 2:18 a.m. Cabin 9283, elderly couple, both retired teachers, very polite. They weren't panicking, just confused. The husband said, "We've been hearing knocking, not on the doors, on the wall. It's been going on for 10 minutes. It stops, then starts again." I asked if it might be someone next door playing music or moving furniture. He replied, "There's no music and it's rhythmic, not random, just 3 knocks, pause, then 3 more." I checked my tablet. Sure enough, the cabin next door, 9284, was marked unoccupied, closed for maintenance. I radioed facilities to confirm. Their response? 9284? Yeah, that one's sealed. Been that way for over 2 weeks. Plumbing issue, no one's got a key. Which struck me as odd, because if it was just plumbing, why not fix it? Why leave a prime cabin empty mid-cruise? I went up to deck 9 to check for myself. The hallway was dim, mostly empty. I passed a few cleaning carts, but otherwise it was dead silent. The kind of silence that makes every step feel too loud. I reached 9284 and stood in front of the door. It looked like any other. White paneling, brass handle, a tiny peephole. I knocked. No answer. I pressed my ear against the wall between 9283 and 9284. At first I heard nothing. Then, just as I was about to step away, 3 knocks, even slow and deliberate. Coming from inside the sealed cabin, I froze. Every instinct told me to step back, to get help, but I had to know. I radioed engineering again and asked if anyone could override the lock manually. They were reluctant. At first, the supervisor gave me the usual line, "If it's closed, leave it closed," but I insisted. 10 minutes later, a senior tech met me on deck 9 with a physical override tool. He slid it into the door's side panel and twisted. The lock disengaged with a mechanical clunk. As he pushed the door open, a blast of cold, stale air hit us in the face. The lights were off. The air was heavier inside, like the room hadn't breathed in months. The tech clicked on his flashlight. The room was empty. Not messy, not damaged. Just abandoned. Dust covered the nightstands and TV. The sheets were still tucked in, but yellowed slightly as if no one had touched them in weeks. But what made my stomach tighten were the marks on the far wall. Scratches. Long vertical gouges, 5 in a row, as if someone had been clawing at the wall from the inside. They weren't fresh, but they weren't old either. We checked the carpet, no footprints. No sign of rodents, insects, nothing. The tech looked pale. He said, "We should go." We relocked the cabin and I didn't file a report. I didn't want to explain what I couldn't understand. A few nights later, a guest staying 2 cabins down pulled me aside. He said he was walking back to his room around 4 a.m. after a late drink at the piano lounge. As he passed 9284, he heard something inside. Not scratching this time. Not knocking. Crying. A woman's voice, soft and distant, like she was sitting in the dark, gently sobbing. He leaned in, thinking maybe someone had been locked in accidentally. He knocked once. The crying stopped instantly. Then he heard a shuffle, like someone slowly approaching the door. But the peephole remained black. He waited, and then a whisper. From behind the door, "Why did you lock me in?" He bolted. I confronted the senior purser later that day. I asked plainly, "What's the story with 9284? She hesitated, then said, "Some cabins carry things with them, from other ships, from past lives. Sometimes the sea doesn't let go of everyone who boards." That was all she said, and that was enough. From then on, I took the long way around whenever I had to pass that room. Because I started to believe the stories. Not out of fear, but because of something far worse. Because the room was quiet again, and that silence felt unnatural, as if whatever had been inside was waiting. Not gone, just patient. They don't advertise it, but many cruise ships do have a Deck 13. Some skip it for superstition, sure, but others just rename it. On the Pacific Aurora, the 13th deck wasn't hidden. It was right there in the elevator. Press the button, and the lights flicker slightly before it starts to rise. I used to joke it was the most haunted elevator ride in the Caribbean. That was before I started working on board. Before I saw what really happened one night, to cabin 1319. I was part of the night security crew, basically the ship's internal police once the sun went down. Around 2:30 a.m., we received an emergency call from a woman in 1320. She said she heard shouting and crashing from the room next door. 1319 said it sounded like someone was having a breakdown or maybe a fight. We got there within 3 minutes. The hallway was empty, quiet. No signs of a disturbance. I knocked on 1319, no response. We keyed in using the master override. The door opened. The room was spotless. Perfectly made bed, no luggage, no clothes, no signs of life. At first, we assumed it had been a prank call, until my partner checked the manifest. Cabin 1319 was occupied. A solo passenger, Mr. Jordan Vale, 47 years old. Business class ticket. Checked in 4 days ago. He had used his key card multiple times, ordered room service. His cabin account showed a drink order just 2 hours earlier. But he was gone. Vanished. No trace. No signs of struggle, no water on the floor, nothing out of place. Just an empty cabin. We pulled the hallway security footage. At 2:12 a.m., Vale left his room barefoot, wearing only a white undershirt and slacks. He walked slowly down the hallway, turned right toward the observation deck. And that's where the footage cut out. It didn't glitch. It just stopped. The file ended. When we played the next segment, it started at 2:16 a.m. 4 full minutes gone. The timestamp jumped, as if nothing had been recorded in between. We checked all other cameras on Deck 13, same gap, same blackout. Only during those 4 minutes. We checked door logs. No one entered 1319 after that. No keycard activity, no staff reports, no motion sensor activity inside the room. It was as if Jordan Vale had walked off the ship in the middle of the night, from a closed deck with no open access to water. His belongings were never recovered. No passport, no phone, not even his shoes. We searched for hours. The captain quietly extended our stay in port the next morning to perform a technical inspection, which was just a cover for a crew-wide search. Nothing. No lifeboats missing, no railing damage, no passengers reported seeing anything strange. The official report stated, passenger Jordan Vale, presumed overboard due to voluntary action. No foul play suspected. But everyone on the night crew knew that was nonsense, because of what we found 2 nights later. The night crew was doing a routine sweep of Deck 13 again, just to reassure passengers. As we passed cabin 1319, I noticed something odd. The peephole on the door had fogged over, like someone inside had been breathing against it. I knocked, fully expecting nothing, but the door creaked open an inch. It wasn't locked. No one had touched that door in 48 hours. It was supposed to be sealed until Port Authority could inspect it. I opened it fully and stepped inside. Everything was the same, except now, on the mirror across from the bed, there was writing. Faint, written in condensation. Just 3 words. He followed me. I stepped closer. The mirror was cold but dry. The message was starting to fade. My partner stood frozen in the doorway. He said, "We locked this room, didn't we?" I nodded. We backed out, locked it again manually. But I couldn't sleep the rest of that night. Not just because of the message, but because I kept replaying the hallway footage from earlier. Vale walking calmly toward the deck, barefoot, like he was following someone. Someone the cameras never showed. Someone who walked just out of frame, just beyond the edge of the light. The next day, the ship quietly reassigned cabins around that wing. No one stayed in 1319 again for the rest of the cruise. But on our last night at sea, a crew member from the housekeeping team said she was cleaning room 1323 just after 3 a.m. She said she heard whispers outside in the hallway. She looked through the peephole and saw a barefoot man in a white shirt standing outside 1319 facing the door. She blinked, stepped back and opened the door. The hallway was empty. Cabin 1319 was sealed permanently after that trip. On the next sailing, it was removed from the manifest, the door painted over. No number, no sign it had ever existed. But sometimes, late at night, when the ship sways and the air feels too still, the cabin stewards on deck 13 say they still hear the door of an unmarked room unlocking itself, then slowly clicking shut. There's a part of every cruise ship that passengers never see. Below the glittering lounges, the pools, the buffets, there's a maze of narrow corridors and compact dorms where the crew lives. Some call it below deck, but those of us who worked there knew it as the hull maze. I worked as a junior line cook on a Mediterranean cruise ship called the Silver Horizon. My shift started at 4 a.m. and ended at noon, which meant I usually slept in the early afternoons, long before most guests were even awake. My bunk was in compartment C9, a room shared with 2 other cooks. Cramped, metal walls, no windows, one buzzing overhead light. We called it the tin can. One day, maybe 5 or 6 days into a 2-week voyage, I had just laid down for a nap. It was quiet as usual, the kind of quiet where the engine hum becomes background noise and your ears ring with the silence. I had barely closed my eyes when I heard it. Crying. A child. Soft at first and a slow rhythmic sobbing. I sat up confused. No children were allowed below deck 2, and this was deck 0, restricted to crew only. It didn't make sense. I opened the door and stepped into the corridor. Dim yellow light stretched endlessly in both directions. The crying continued, echoing, distant. It sounded like it was coming from one of the storage rooms near the laundry area. I followed it, expecting to find someone's phone left playing a video or maybe a prank. But as I got closer, the sound didn't grow louder. It stayed the same, as if it were always just out of reach. I reached the laundry room and opened the door. Empty, just stacks of towels, uniform bins, and a flickering ceiling bulb. But in the corner, barely noticeable, were wet footprints. Small, barefoot, too small to be from a crew member. And then the crying stopped. Not faded, just stopped, like someone had pressed mute. I called security and explained what I'd heard. They sent a night officer down to do a quick check. He walked the halls, looked in the rooms, even replayed the CCTV. Nothing. No child, no movement, not even me, they said. That was the first time something didn't add up. The camera in the laundry hallway hadn't recorded anything. Not even me opening the door. They chalked it up to a glitch. I chalked it up to stress. But that wasn't the last time I heard her. Over the next 3 nights, the crying returned. Always around the same time, between 1:45 and 2:15 a.m. Always echoing through the corridor. Always too far to find, but too close to ignore. One night I decided I was going to follow it all the way. I brought a flashlight and walked slowly down the hull corridor, through the laundry section, and into the back storage access, an area we called the cold spine because of the way it made your back tense when you walked it. The crying led me there, and for the first time it got louder. I turned the corner and saw something that made my mouth go dry. At the end of the corridor, standing in front of a closed supply locker, was a little girl. maybe 6 years old. Long black hair, barefoot, wearing an old-fashioned white nightgown wet around the hem like she'd stepped through a puddle. She was facing the locker, not moving, just sobbing softly. I froze, and in that moment the ship groaned. You know that deep mechanical shift when the engines change pitch? It echoed through the metal. She turned. Her eyes were black, not shadowed, black entirely. No whites, no irises. She didn't blink. She just looked at me, Juan, and whispered, "Why did you leave me?" I dropped the flashlight. When I picked it back up, the corridor was empty. The crying was gone, only silence. I reported it to my supervisor. I was visibly shaken. He didn't laugh, he didn't mock me. He just asked, "Cold spine?" I nodded. He sighed. Then he said something I'll never forget. We had an incident, years ago. A family member of a crew worker snuck on board. A child. She wasn't supposed to be there. No one noticed. During a fire drill, she got locked in one of the old supply lockers. By the time someone opened it, it was too late. They found her body 2 days later during port inspection. By then, her mother had already been fired and disappeared. The report was buried. The cabin was decommissioned. No one spoke of it. That night, I moved bunks, switched with a steward on deck 1. I never walked the cold spine again, not alone. But sometimes, even now, I still hear her. In dreams. In sudden silences. That distant, heart-wrenching cry that seems to echo through metal. Still searching. Still waiting. Still asking why no one came. I used to work the disembarkation team for a cruise line that docked out of Miami. It was a simple enough job. Help passengers leave the ship at the end of a voyage, make sure they didn't forget their luggage, scan their key cards one last time, and reset the manifest for the next set of guests. But the final passenger count always had to match the manifest. Always. That rule was non-negotiable. We were wrapping up a 2-week cruise around the southern Caribbean. 7 ports, over 3,000 passengers. It had been a smooth run, no major incidents, just the usual mix of sunburns, lost room keys, and a lot of champagne. Disembarkation day is usually chaotic. People lined up, bags rolling across the metal deck, everyone trying to beat the traffic back to the airport. I was scanning keycards at the gangway when I noticed something strange. Our passenger manifest showed one guest unaccounted for. Cabin 6221, Mr. Daniel Sloan, mid-50s, solo traveler. I checked with housekeeping. They said his room was empty, bags gone, towels used, bed made. Sounded normal, but the keycard log showed no exit swipe. Security double-checked. Cameras showed no footage of him leaving the cabin hallway or joining the disembarkation line. We scanned the entire deck 6 footage. Nothing. At first, we assumed it was a tech glitch. Maybe the scanner missed him. Maybe his card had been demagnetized. But policy said we couldn't close the manifest or clear the ship until every passenger was accounted for. So the ship's head of security ordered a search. We swept every public area. Lounges, bars, stairwells, even the gym. Crew started checking cabins one by one. Then someone on the cleaning staff radioed in. We found something in cabin 6221. The room appeared normal at first. Bed made, towels fresh. The air faintly smelled of cologne and aftershave. But when they pulled the bathroom mirror off the wall, which is mounted on hinges for maintenance access, they found a small, dark compartment behind it. Inside was a journal, a simple leather-bound notebook. No identifying information, no receipts, no tags. But the first page read, "If you're reading this, then I didn't leave. Not because I didn't want to, but because I wasn't allowed to." The entries inside were dated, about 10 days worth. They started out normal. Beautiful sunset tonight, met a nice couple from Oregon. Food is good. Bartender makes a mean old-fashioned. Then things got darker. I keep seeing the same woman outside my cabin every night. Black dress, pale face, no expression. She doesn't blink. doesn't speak, just stands by the door, watching. I told the front desk. They said no one was staying in the cabin next to me. Then the entries stopped. The last page had one line, scrawled hurriedly. She came into the room last night. I locked the door, but she was already inside. There was no sign of Mr. Sloan anywhere on the ship. He wasn't on the cameras. He didn't show up on the departure logs. His cabin key had never been used to exit the ship. He simply vanished. We reported it, of course. The Coast Guard was notified. Port security ran checks, interviewed passengers, reviewed facial recognition logs. Nothing. No sightings, no luggage, no digital footprint past the second to last day of the cruise. His bank card was never used again. His phone, which was never found, was never turned back on. It was as if the ocean kept him. We quietly struck his name from the manifest, filed the report, moved on to the next voyage. Cabin 6231 was deep cleaned and reassigned the following week. But I'll never forget what the new guests said after their first night on board. They came down to guest services, pale and shaking, and asked to be moved to another room. When we asked why, they said, "I think someone sleepwalked into my cabin last night. He was standing at the foot of the bed just staring, mid-50s, thinning hair, wearing a cruise badge. He didn't say anything. Then he just vanished." When we asked what cabin they were in, they looked down at the room key. It's 2-1. Sometimes, when the ship is quiet and the decks are empty, crew say they still see a man standing alone near the gangway, just before sunrise, wearing a faded passenger lanyard and holding a journal, staring at the ocean, like he's waiting for his name to be called, waiting for someone to scan his card and let him leave. But no one ever does, because he never really left at all. And there you have it. 5 cruise ship horror stories that were never meant to reach the surface. Stories whispered in crew quarters, buried in maintenance logs, or lost somewhere between one voyage and the next. Out at sea, there are no neighbors, no help, no escape, only water, and whatever chooses to follow you across it. If you've ever felt something watching you from beyond the railing, maybe you weren't imagining it. If you enjoyed these tales from the deep, subscribe to the horror channel 786 for more true horror stories told from the shadows. We upload every night, and the next story might just be yours.